stayed with me, and there's always been an icon of perpetual help in my home, sometimes more than one. And it's funny that when I moved into my new office in the Archdiocese, I was feeling a bit lonely and not very connected to Redemptorists at the moment, and kind of, you know. And an old lady walked in with a really old, like 150-year-old icon, and said, "Do you want this, honey?" She had no idea. And it hangs on my wall in my office. It's literally ancient. But the mercy of God. And the only response to something like that, I think what David talked this morning, is, wow. Yeah, mercy. It's terrific. I'm going to tell you another story. About 15 years ago, there was a murder in Newfoundland. A young 13-year-old girl was murdered by a 15-year-old boy. I don't think he intended to kill her. He intended to rape her. And somehow things went not what he had planned, and he ended up killing her. And he hid her body in a snowbank. 3 weeks later, they found her, eventually found who had killed her. And you know how it is with these things? The grief teams move in, the counselors come in, the media is watching, and everybody is hanging together as a community. Now, the community where this happened had 250 people. And like many tiny communities, this one is on the coast of Newfoundland, a third of the people in the community were related to her, a third were related to him, and a third were related to both. Right? And when the TV cameras went off and the grief counselors went home, nobody knew how to talk to one another. How do we talk to people we've grown up with who are related to the one who killed our child? How do we help our kids to realize that they need to move on and how to move on? And if we're connected to both people, how do we do that? I go think back to John's talk this morning. How do we relate as, in some ways, both oppressed and oppressor in that situation, as wrongly done by and having done wrong kind of vicariously? So after about a year and a half of these people fracturing further apart, the parish priest called me and said, "Can you get one of your Redemptorist friends and come preach a mission? Because I can't figure out how I'm going to get these people together, even to talk to one another." He said, "You're going to absolutely be horrified when you see the church in this little town, because the kind of the symbol, I think, of their fracturing was in their lack of ability to care for the building that they worshipped in." And so it had really fallen down. The aisle, when we walked in the first night of this mission, the aisle was like the ocean. You were kind of really nervous when you walked up the aisle. And we had figured out that what we needed to do is the main purpose of this mission was, yes, to bring healing, the healing of God, but by asking them to talk, finding ways for them to talk to one another. And so the first night, we literally drew straws who was going to preach that night. And I got the short one. And Leo English was the other, the Redemptorist who was with me. And I said I was going to talk about Paschal Mystery and talk about how the suffering, the death, the rising, and then the glorification of Jesus, how we live that in our day-to-day life, and try to help them see that this is what they were going through, that their experience was a mirror of Jesus' experience, and that there was hope in that. So I gave this, what I thought was decent but terrified sermon, and then I turned to them and said, "I'd like you to talk to one another. Do you see yourselves anywhere in this story?" And there was that awful, awful silence that went on and on. And I thought, I'm not going to do what the teacher in me wants to do, which is jump up and give them an answer. I said, no, I'm going to wait. And finally, a lady over here jumped up, literally jumped up, and her fists were clenched like this. And she said, "That's all right for you." I could cry when I think about it. "That's all right for you, but it's not your granddaughter that was murdered." It's true. He said, "And I don't know, I don't think there's anyone in heaven or on earth who can relate to what's happened to me." And tears started to stream. And she repeated it. She said, "There's no one in heaven or on earth that can understand." Then she said this, "Even Jesus doesn't understand, because he just died on the cross. You're talking about all this stuff. he wasn't killed. He just died. You think about the things you hear all your life and you assume people know. And so I stopped for, I was going to accept it. I went, no. Her name was Fee. And I said, Fee, Jesus was killed. And she said, what? She's still standing up talking to me. And she said, what? I said, he was killed. The Romans put him to death. He was killed on the cross. He didn't just die there. And she went, I never knew that. And then it dawned on me. I said, and his mother watched it happen. And she just started to bawl. And she said, for a year and a half, I could have been talking to Mary, and I didn't. I said, you can start now. Right? She thought all the mysteries of our faith were so sanitized for her. And I think for everybody who was sitting there, they never really thought that this has anything to do with us. But what broke her resolve, or her that wall, was that his mother watched it happen. And then she started to wake up. And across the church, you almost can guess what happened next. An old man stood up and he said, Fiend, I'm the sorriest person on earth. I didn't kill your granddaughter, but I raised a killer. And I don't know how to cope with that. And so she said, it's not your fault. You didn't do it. And they started to talk to each other. And in some ways, the mission had already succeeded, hey? It had already accomplished what it was supposed to do. Later on that night, when we sent them home, said, okay, enough now. No, we'll figure out what we're doing next, because I have no idea what to do next. The next thing that happened was the moms came, a group of younger mothers, and said, can you do with our kids what you're doing with us? Because they don't know how to talk to each other either. And so what we did every night that week was we had a 5 o'clock children's mission that we hadn't planned for, so there was always some kind of activity. And then at 7, we presented the kids' activity as the kind of kernel for the adult mission. This is what your kids are saying. What do you say about that? It turned out to be the most graced experience for me. But it all started with, and his mother watched it happen. And that was what broke the silence, really. The wall came down. And I think in lots of ways, we have a particular window into Mary and into the mysteries of our faith through her. We've sometimes tended to sanitize her too. But she is our model for mission. When I think about Mary now, largely because of that experience, I see her as, yes, my sister, but also as my friend and companion on all these missions that, or whatever it is I tend to be doing. I talk to her now as if she's my sister in faith. I do believe that more than anything, that she is part of this great mission of Jesus, and that she accompanies me on the way. So I want to look at a very familiar icon to all of us through that lens. Because I think we often talk about, when we talk about perpetual help, what's the first word that comes to your mind? Mother. Devotions. And we often stop there. Stop at devotion. And I think that it's a great thing to do. But I think Mary calls us to more than that, wants more than that from us. So, many of you, not all, will know this story. That in 1865, Pius IX entrusted the Redemptorist family with an icon. And the following year, his commissioning was, make her known to the world. And Redemptorists have been doing that ever since. Now, 1866, was St. Alphonsus around? No. It's likely that Alphonsus never saw this icon. But I was telling Peter this today, I kind of like to think that he did. I'm not sure of this. But we know from his own writing that when he was in, I like to think, yeah, that when he was in Rome, waiting to become a bishop and kind of agonizing over that appointment, he did not want it. He had refused other appointments. So this was a period of great angst. And what he did to get through his angst was he went to every icon and shrine of Our Lady in Rome. Now, he doesn't name them all, but at that time, the icon hadn't gone into hiding. The Church of St. Matthew hadn't been destroyed yet. And so I'd like to think that he actually went into that church And maybe that was one of the shrines of Mary that he visited. But I have no way to know that. So if you get to heaven first, you ask him. I think our Pope gives us, I'm madly in love with Pope Francis. I just think he is the most wonderful person for calling us to a renewed sense of what it means to be missionary disciples. What he says about the mission of Mary is this. In The Joy of the Gospel, he talks about the encounter with Christ. And he also says that the first missionary disciple is Mary. I love to think of her in that context. Mary as my sister, as a missionary disciple, walking with me. But what Father Mike Braille encouraged me to do was think about me accompanying her on her mission, not always her on mine. And I appreciate that greatly. That makes a lot of sense. From the cross, think back to John's talk today. Jesus entrusted Mary with a special saving mission. Here is your mother. And to us, or to her, here are your children. It's us. We are entrusted to her at the foot of the cross. So she accompanies us as our mother. And so that we might read in that icon all the mysteries of redemption. The one thing that I want to be really clear about is that Mary never calls attention to herself. I'm thinking out of Francis's talk. It's all about Jesus all the time for her. She sees herself as vehicle, as a company, as a means of encounter, but the encounter is with Jesus all the time. So with Mary, I think we are prophetic witnesses to the Redeemer today. So what does Francis actually say? In Laudato Si, I'm going to pick a couple of Francis's major letters or pieces of work and just pick a line from them. In Laudato Si, the one on care for our common home, Mary teaches us how to transform the world into our common home with tenderness and maternal love. Pope Francis says that what's required now at this moment in our history is that we encounter our world, our broken world, with tenderness and maternal love. In Amoris Laetitia, Mary embraces in friendship and brings joy to all those in need, sensitive to their human situation. She takes people where they are and walks with them. Now, if you're thinking, all this is Jesus' mission, not Mary's, that's exactly the point. Everything she does and is to point to Jesus. Like her son, Mary has compassion and mercy for all those who suffer, understanding their pain from her experience. So that's in the letter at the beginning of the year of mercy, Misericordiae Vultus. In her Magnificat, Mary teaches us the revolutionary love and tenderness to transform and heal the world in Evangelii Gaudium. As a missionary disciple, Mary draws near to God's people and accompanies them through her life. So she shows us the meaning of solidarity. In the Acts of the Apostles and in her shrines, Mary creates spaces for gathering pilgrims together, mostly the poor and the suffering. So one thing we know for sure, our mission as a Redemptorist family is the mission of the church. We exist at the heart of the church. But it's like if you hold up a diamond to the light, there's one charism, and it's the charism of Jesus. But there are facets to a diamond. Right? So the diamond is the charism of Jesus. We are a facet of that diamond. We are missionary disciples in a particular key. Right? If you think of people as a symphony or the church as a symphony, we play in a particular key. So Constitution 1, the very first constitution in the Redemptorist constitutions and statutes, which sometimes has been called the rule today, that's exactly the same, means the same thing. The Constitution of the Congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer, founded by St. Alphonsus, is a clerical missionary religious institute of pontifical right, enjoying the privilege of exemption, having members belonging to various rights. That's just to get some things out of the way there. Its purpose is to follow the example of Jesus Christ the Redeemer by preaching the word of God to the poor As he declared of himself, he sent me to bring the good news to the poor. In this way, the congregation shares the mandate given to the church. We are missionary disciples with Mary. So I think what Our Lady of Perpetual Help, that icon, calls us to is a movement. We've been familiar with devotion to our Mother of Perpetual Help. And I think we're being called by Pope Francis, by our church, and by our own constitutions and statutes, and by our own spirit, to move from devotion to mission. So let's look at what that might be. So what do you see? What do you see in the eyes? What is that? What are they saying to you?
Compassion.
Yeah. Think about me as a kid, right? Sitting on the bed at night, watching those eyes. I love you. You're mine. I gotcha. Right? I think that's true. And Pope Francis says that when people come to these Marian shrines, whether it's Our Lady of Perpetual Help or Our Lady of Aparecida, whatever, Our Lady of Guadalupe, they come so that Mary may see them, that they might be seen by Mary, seen by God, that they matter. So what's our mission? I think we are like them. We often come before the icon in order to be seen by Mary. But she and her son call us to something more. She calls us to look at the world through the eyes of the poor and the abandoned. To see this icon from their perspective, or the me who's the kid who's sick. To look at that and say, what is this saying to me? When we look out on the world around us with tenderness, compassion, mercy, and love, what do we see? So she's calling us to look at her through their perspective and to take on her gaze. Not just to contemplate it now from our perspective, how is she gazing on me with love? But when we look out on the world around us through her eyes, through the eyes of her son, what are we seeing? Who do you see? What do you see? I'm actually going to ask you to talk to one another about that. Because if you think of yourself taking on that kind of pensive, loving, tender gaze, it's not looking at her son, it's looking out at us. So let's put ourselves behind those eyes. Who do you see? And I'm going to ask you to, in twos or threes, to think about you looking at the world with the eyes of Jesus or the eyes of Mary in this icon. They're the same. Mary gave her son her eyes. He inherited them. So, what do you see when you look out with those eyes? Take a few minutes. And what do you see? What are these people? Who are these people? What are their needs? That's it. It really changes things when we put ourselves behind the icon and look out through the eyes instead of stand in front of them. It changes so much. When you talk about the justice of God, wow. I see her and him. I see the little girl and the guy who killed her. And my heart can't stretch enough yet to love both, right? I want to, though. And then to think about what that means. But I pray to be able to love that way. Yeah. What else did you say?
And I heard the stories and the tragedies of young people that have gone through, foster care systems that have been abused and neglected. And so I have seen the motherless and the fatherless. And many times, oftentimes, brought tears to my eyes. But I also have an opportunity to show forgiveness. Initially, I was angry at the parent, because these children had to suffer with no cause of their own. But the forgiveness of the parent is very important. And my daughter that I adopted, even after the adoption, I embraced her birth mother into my life.
So a real experience of looking at some folks with those very same eyes, the eyes of a mother who loves. I think there's a phrase my mother uses a lot, and it's, we know when you're a kid and you say, "Mom, who do you love most?" There are 8 of us, and we often said, "Mom, who do you love most?" She had an answer that now I think is really wise. I didn't think so when I was 10, but it's, "I love most the one who needs me most." Yeah, I think there's some truth to that, right? There's a special call on attention for them. So, because we see, or begin to see, with tenderness, compassion, and mercy, how does our mission come into clearer focus? And that's exactly what we've been talking about. That when we turn it around and look out and see ourselves sharing the vision, the gaze of Mary, and the mission, something changes in us. We're so used to seeing ourselves as the one gazed upon, and we need that too. But to be part of this mission with her, the mission of her son with her, is important. So the task of a missionary disciple, or of a community, a family of missionary disciples in the world, really is to transform the world. And first, by seeing. Just simple as that, and it's not simple at all. To share the gaze of Mary is to be called upon to transform our own vision and to transform the world, to be a minister of redemption. Pope Francis talks about the revolutionary nature of love and tenderness to transform the world. So Mary holds together. I think it's interesting because I wasn't thinking about either of you when I planned this session, but she holds together justice and tenderness, contemplation and compassion, and prayer and action. And so must we. Always in balance. Not always in perfect balance, but in balance, right? I want you to look at this aspect of the icon. How Mary holds her son. What do you see there? Yeah. Her hands are big, yeah. They're really big, you're right. And are so tiny, and still he's kind of this adult-looking Jesus, right? He's there. But her hands are so big. What about you? If we think now about us sharing in her mission, she accompanying us on ours, what is that? What do those hands say to you? They're huge, right? What's called forth from us?
She has room for us.
Yeah. Yeah, open hands, cradling that baby. Yeah. And so must we. Right? Have open hands to cradle the broken, to cradle the abandoned, to cradle the lost, to cradle the grieving, to cradle those who are smelly, to cradle those who are hurt, are bleeding, are kind of gross. But we're called to cradle them. So when you gaze out on the world with Mary, who needs to be held like that? Everybody at one time or another, yeah. Is there anybody or any particular group that's pop into your mind? Because a veterinarian really is a work of redemption. It's not with the pets so much, although that can be, but it's with the families, and especially those old folks for whom that might be their life companion. Right? What a ministry. So yeah, to see things differently because of this, right? I think it's really important. So how do you, with Mary, hold together in your big hands justice and tenderness, contemplation and compassion, or prayer and action? How do you do that? And what I ask you to do for a moment is take some time with the same small group and think about how you hold these tensions between justice and tenderness, justice and mercy, contemplation and compassion, or prayer and action? How do you share the mission of transforming the world through this tenderness? Maybe more what comes to your heart when you see the sandal dripping off.
He came to her in haste.
He came to her in haste. Yeah,
Leaped up into her.
Yeah, your emotions do something with you when you see the sandal, right? You're gonna go, oh, here's the baby jumps into her arms. I mean, in such haste that he's.
Reminds me of a child, because I worked in a grocery store for so many years, of a child that doesn't want to sit in the grocery cart and ends up kicking off their shoes like they always do. That's what it reminds me
Yeah. It's true, hey? Yeah. More than any piece of the icon, probably more than the eyes, the sandal does something to a lot of us. So Mary's a real person. She's really our sister. She's human like us, and she's an icon of God's maternal love. So what we're seeing here is God's maternal love, reaching for that child who's leaped into God's arms, right? So we already said that. What does this symbolize for you? In the world around you, when you think about someone with no sandals, sometimes we think of children, and sometimes we think of people who've had everything taken from them. Everything stripped from them. I mean, I love kicking off my shoes, but there's a lot of people who don't have that choice, right? For whom there are no shoes. We hear stories all the time about kids who share shoes to go to school, who have no. So there's something about shoes and dignity have come to have be synonymous for a lot of us. So when you think about that, looking at the world behind the icon, through the eyes, whose dignity has been lost or has been taken from them? Who do you see when you look out into your corner of the vineyard, not across the world, although some will see that? Where do you see people whose dignity has been stripped away, been taken from them, or somehow lost?
For me, it's the blind, because not only do their parents, some parents still have this idea that because their child was born blind, it's something about them, and they take it out on the child, and then, as we minister them as they're older, they still have that feeling, and they need that healing. It's unbelievable.
It really does engage the Redemptorist heart in a particular way, and yeah, we're called to devotion, and we're called to stand and let her gaze on us sometimes, or gaze on her with pleading or love or pain. But we're also called as missionary disciples to look out through it, and it really does transform. What other situations pop to mind? I know Redemptorists always have this question of who's the most abandoned. Or now we're saying who's wounded. And we know. If we put all our heads and hearts together and our experiences, we've met them and know who they are. And we actually do reach out to them with the same hands of Jesus or his mother, because we are those fingers in the world. We can have all the conversations, and we need to have them. But it's already happening in your circles. You meet, you encounter, you see, and you deal with many of these people who've been stripped of dignity, or who are wounded, or who are abandoned every day. That's what makes you. The fact that you see them is part of what makes you part of this family. And you didn't start seeing them when you got in the family. You got in the family because you saw them already, most likely. Let's look at the gaze of Jesus, because this is kind of interesting. In this icon, the gaze of Jesus is not at you. His mother's gaze is on you, but not Jesus. It's directed toward the cross, the spear, the sponge, the nails, and those who carry them. Or are they? It's just as likely that the gaze is beyond them. Right? It's just as likely that he's looking beyond the instruments of death. So when you think about the world around you, where is the body of Christ afraid, alone, or in peril? And where is the body of Christ looking at hope? It's really unclear. When you go back to look at this icon in a minute, is he looking at those instruments of death, or is he looking beyond them? So for you, I'm going to ask you to get into your small group again. Where is the body of Christ afraid, alone, or in peril? And where do you gaze, or where do they gaze on signs of hope? Where's the Lady of Perpetual Help on the wall? And to see that for many who come to her to be gazed upon, that's an act of devotion. And sometimes that's us, and we're called to devotion. But more than that, she calls us to mission. Really, it's a movement, I think, we're being called to from devotion to mission, to be real witnesses to the Redeemer, to her Son, in solidarity for mission to a wounded world. So our mandate and mission with Our Lady Perpetual Help isn't only to make her known. Today, we're called to do a whole lot more. Our mission today must be to accompany Mary in her mission as a missionary disciple of Jesus. And I think there are 4 movements. Accompany. To accompany the abandoned and the poor with compassion, tenderness, and maternal love. I think the second thing is to gather. When you think about the Marian shrines, our own shrines of Our Lady of Perpetual Help and the other Marian shrines that we know of, she gathers people, and so must we. We must gather God's people as pilgrims, especially the poor and the suffering, and to move from a me to an us with them. I think the third thing, and I go back to Francis's talk and to John's today, to struggle for justice with the revolutionary power of love and tenderness that we see in the Magnificat. And then last, to pray in the midst of God's people for the inbreaking of that redemption that we are ministers of. When we look out at the world through those eyes of mercy, tenderness, and compassion, we're also looking out with eyes of justice, of longing. So to pray in the midst of God's people for the ever more complete realization of the mercy and the redemption of God. And I believe, we talked about all these mysteries today, that redemption isn't just at the end of our lives. Redemption is what we're ministers of here and now. It's any time somebody needs to come from an oppressive situation to whatever, from darkness to light, from pain to healing, from sorrow to joy, from oppression to liberation. And there's a third piece. It's the for what. Redemption, I think, has 3 movements: from, to, and then the purpose for which we are redeemed, which is that participation in the greater and ongoing realization of the reign of God.